The mist clung to the ancient pines like a shroud, heavy and unyielding, as if the forest itself wept for secrets long buried. Elara's boots sank into the damp earth with each cautious step, the cold seeping through leather to numb her toes. The air tasted of pine resin and decay, sharp against her tongue, while distant thunder rumbled like the growl of forgotten gods. She had wandered too far from the village lights, drawn by that sound, a cry that pierced the night, not the frantic yelp of a hunted beast, but something deeper, laced with longing and command. Her cloak, frayed at the edges from months of endless travel, whipped against her legs as a chill wind stirred the branches overhead. Elara paused, hand pressed to her chest where her heart hammered like a war drum. She was no stranger to the wilds, born in the shadow of the shattered spires of Eldrath, where the old empire's bones crumbled into the soil. She had learned to read the whispers of the woods. But this cry, it tugged at her, a silver thread pulling at the frayed edges of her soul. It promised answers to questions she dared not voice aloud. Why did the dreams haunt her? Why did the mark on her wrist burn like embers when the moon rose full? She shook her head, silver hair escaping its braid to stick to her sweat-dampened brow. Foolish girl, her mother's voice echoed in her mind, sharp as the thorns that snagged her hem. Stay to the paths, away from the beasts that prowl the vale. But the paths had led her nowhere, only to empty hearths and hollow-eyed villagers who whispered of curses spreading from the north, where the Alpha's packs roamed unchecked. Elara had left it all behind after the fever took her family, the same sickness that twisted men into shadows of themselves, eyes glowing with unnatural hunger. She sought the healers in the mist-shrouded vales, or so she told herself. Truth was, she fled the emptiness gnawing inside her, the sense that she was adrift in a world, unraveling at the seams. The cry came again, closer now, echoing through the fog like a siren's call. It wasn't pain in that howl, but a summons, raw and insistent, vibrating through her bones. Elara's breath caught, and she gripped the hilt of the small dagger at her belt, a relic from her father, its blade etched with runes that had long since faded. The forest seemed to hold its breath with her, leaves rustling softly as if urging her onward. Against every instinct screaming to turn back, she pressed forward, the underbrush parting like reluctant curtains. The ground sloped downward, leading her into a hollow, where moonlight pierced the canopy in fractured beams. Here, the trees grew twisted, their bark scarred by claw marks that gleamed wetly in the pale light. Ruins peeked from the mist, crumbled stone arches overgrown with ivy, remnants of some pre-Empire temple dedicated to the moon spirits. Elara's skin prickled. She'd heard tales of such places, where the veil between worlds thinned and the wild ones crossed over. Her wrist throbbed again, the faint scar there, a crescent moon inked in her own blood during a childhood ritual, pulsing in rhythm with the distant howl. She froze as a shape materialized from the shadows ahead. At first it was just eyes, 2 points of molten silver, unblinking, fixed on her with an intelligence that sent ice through her veins. Then the wolf stepped into the light, massive and ethereal, its fur as white as fresh-fallen snow, untouched by the mud and decay around it. It was no ordinary beast. Its shoulders stood level with her waist, muscles rippling beneath that pristine coat like coiled storms. The air around it hummed with power, a faint shimmer distorting the mist, as if reality bent to its will. Elara's dagger hand trembled, but she didn't draw. The wolf didn't advance, didn't bare fangs. Instead, it tilted its head, ears pricked, and let out a low whine that carried the weight of unspoken pleas. In that moment something shifted within her, a flicker of recognition, like gazing into a mirror cracked by time. She took a step closer, heart pounding, the world narrowing to those silver eyes. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustle of leaves. The wolf's gaze held hers, patient, almost sorrowful, as if it bore the burdens of kingdoms she couldn't yet fathom. Compelled, Elara extended her hand, palm up, the scarred wrist catching the moonlight. The wolf sniffed the air, nostrils flaring, and for a heartbeat she swore she saw a shadow of a man in its form, broad shoulders, a crown of frost-kissed fur. But then it turned, vanishing into the fog with a final resonant cry that echoed in her chest like a vow. She followed, the dagger forgotten, the forest swallowing her whole. Deeper into the hollow they went, the ruins growing denser, vines twisting like serpents over fallen pillars. Elara's breath came in ragged bursts, her mind a whirlwind of fear and inexplicable pull. Branches clawed at her arms, drawing thin lines of blood that mingled with the mist's damp kiss. Why this wolf? Why now? The questions swirled, but her feet moved of their own accord, drawn by the fading echoes of that call. Ahead, the fog parted to reveal a clearing ringed by standing stones, their surfaces etched with glowing runes that pulsed like heartbeats. The wolf waited at the center, silhouetted against a pool of still water that reflected the fractured moon. As Elara approached, the air thickened, charged with an ancient energy that made her skin hum. The beast turned to her, and in its eyes she glimpsed not just wilderness, but a throne room lost to time, a king in exile crowned by solitude. She knelt at the water's edge, reaching out, and the wolf's muzzle brushed her fingers, warm and real. In that touch, visions flashed unbidden, packs thundering across frozen tundras, a crown of thorns and bone, a betrayal that shattered realms. Elara gasped, pulling back, but the connection lingered, a thread binding her to this creature of myth. The wolf's cry rose once more, urgent now, as shadows stirred beyond the stones, eyes gleaming in the dark, not friendly. Elara stood, dagger finally in hand, the night closing in. Whatever destiny this white wanderer heralded, it had claimed her now, and there was no turning back. The shadows beyond the standing stones slithered closer, their forms twisting like smoke-given claws and teeth. Elara's grip tightened on the dagger, the etched runes on its blade catching a faint glow from the pooling moonlight. The air grew thick, laced with the metallic tang of blood and the low rumble of growls that vibrated through the earth. The white wolf stood rigid beside her, its silver eyes narrowing into slits of warning, fur bristling along its spine like frost on a blade's edge. It didn't flee. Instead, it planted its massive paws, a low snarl building in its throat that echoed off the ancient stones, sending ripples across the still water. Elara's heart thundered, her scarred wrist burning as if the moon's mark had ignited within her veins. The visions from the wolf's touch lingered like ghosts, endless winters where packs howled under auroras of blood, a throne carved from ice and bone crumbling under the weight of betrayal, and a figure, man or beast, cloaked in white, reaching out with hands that shifted to paws mid-grasp. She shook her head, forcing clarity into the haze. No time for riddles now. The shadows coalesced into shapes. Wolves, but not like her ethereal guide. These were mangy hulks, eyes burning red as forge embers, lips curled back over fangs yellowed by rot. 5, maybe 6, circling the clearing with predatory patience, their packs sent a foul mix of wet fur and decay that choked the mist. The white wolf lunged forward a step, its body a blur of muscle and moonlight. Positioning itself between her and the encroaching pack, a fierce protectiveness surged through Elara, unbidden and raw, as if the creature's essence had seeped into her blood. "Stay back," she whispered to it, though doubt laced her words. Who was she to command such a beast? Yet it glanced at her, a flicker of something almost human in its gaze, trust or desperation, before facing the threats head-on. The lead shadow wolf, larger than the rest with scars crisscrossing its muzzle like a map of old wars, threw its head back and howled. The sound was a jagged tear in the night, summoning the others to close in. They moved as one, a coordinated strike born of hunger and malice, leaping over the rune-etched stones with unnatural grace. Elara backed toward the water, her boots splashing into the shallows, the cold bite shocking her into motion. She swung the dagger in a wide arc, more instinct than skill, as the first beast vaulted toward her. The white wolf met it mid-air, a collision of fury and light. Claws raked through fur, teeth snapped with bone-crunching force, and the attacker yelped, tumbling into the underbrush with a spray of dark blood. But the others pressed the attack, two flanking the white wolf, while the scarred leader fixated on Elara. She dodged its lunge, the hot rush of its breath grazing her cheek, and drove the dagger into its shoulder. The blade sank deep, warm ichor spilling over her hand, but the beast only roared louder, shaking free with a twist that nearly wrenched her arm from its socket. Pain flared in her side as another wolf's paw clipped her, claws tearing through cloak and flesh. She staggered, tasting copper on her lips, the world blurring into a frenzy of snarls and splashes. The white wolf was everywhere at once, a whirlwind of white, defending her like a sentinel from forgotten legends. It barreled into the scarred leader, pinning it to the ground with jaws clamped around its throat. A sickening crunch followed, and the beast went limp, but not before its claws gouged deep furrows into the wolf's flank, matting that pristine coat with crimson. Elara fought on, her strikes wild but fueled by a fire she hadn't known she carried. One wolf clamped onto her leg, teeth sinking in just above the ankle, and she screamed, slamming the dagger's hilt into its skull until it released her with a whine. The pain was a white-hot blaze, but it sharpened her senses, the runes on her wrist glowing brighter, pulsing in time with the standing stones. The air hummed with power, the mist swirling into tendrils that lashed at the remaining attackers like whips of fog and fury. As suddenly as it began, the skirmish ended. The last shadow wolf fled into the trees, its howls fading into pitiful echoes, leaving the clearing strewn with broken bodies and the metallic reek of slaughter. Elara collapsed to her knees in the shallows, breath ragged, blood seeping from wounds that stung like accusations. The white wolf limped to her side, its chest heaving, silver eyes dimmed by exhaustion. It nuzzled her shoulder gently, a warmth that cut through the chill, and she reached out, fingers tangling in its bloodied fur. You saved me," she murmured, voice cracking. The touch reignited the visions, not just battles, but a deeper sorrow, a king stripped of his form by a curse woven in the heart of his own court, wandering these wilds as both hunter and hunted, seeking one who could break the chains without dooming his kin. Tears blurred her sight, mingling with the water lapping at her knees. Why her? The emptiness that had driven her from the village felt heavier now, laced with purpose she couldn't grasp. The wolf whined softly, licking at her wounds with a tongue that soothed like balm, staunching the flow. In that quiet aftermath, the forest seemed to breathe with them, the runes on the stones fading to a soft glow, as if the old magic approved of their survival. But peace was fleeting. From the tree line a new sound rose, not a howl, but the distant thunder of hooves and the clash of steel. Riders, perhaps the Empire's remnants, or worse, the curse hunters who scoured the wilds for abominations. The white wolf's ears flattened, and it tugged at her cloak with its teeth, urging her toward the far side of the clearing, where the ruins delved deeper into shadow. Elara rose, leaning on it for support, her leg throbbing with each step. The bond between them tightened, an invisible tether pulling her into the unknown. They slipped into the undergrowth, the mist closing behind like a veil drawn shut. Behind them, torches flickered to life in the distance, voices calling out in harsh tongues that promised no mercy. Elara glanced back once, the pool reflecting a sky bruised with storm clouds, and wondered if the cry that had drawn her here was a beginning or an end. The wolf pressed on, its limp mirroring her own, two wanderers bound by blood and fate, vanishing into the heart of the ancient woods where secrets festered like open wounds. The night deepened, heavy with the weight of what was to come, and in her chest a spark of resolve flickered, fragile but unyielding. The underbrush clawed at Elara's cloak like jealous fingers, thorns snagging fabric and skin as she stumbled forward, the white wolf's warmth a steady anchor against her side. Her wounded leg dragged, each step sending jolts of fire up her thigh. But the beast's nudge kept her moving, its silver eyes flashing urgent warnings in the gloom. The mist had thickened into a living thing, coiling around their ankles and muffling the distant shouts of the riders, harsh commands laced with the ring of armor and the snap of whips. Torchlight flickered through the trees like malevolent fireflies, closing the gap with relentless hunger. Elara's breath came in shallow gasps, the metallic tang of blood still thick on her tongue from the skirmish. The visions clung to her like the damp fog, fragments of a life not her own, a crown heavy with ice and regret, a betrayal that echoed in the wolf's every guarded glance. Who was this creature, this king in fur? The question burned hotter than her wounds, stirring the emptiness she'd carried since the fever claimed her family. In the village, she'd been adrift, a ghost haunting empty beds. Now, bound to this wanderer, she felt the stirrings of something vital, a purpose woven from shadows and howls. They plunged deeper into the ruins, the forest giving way to a labyrinth of fallen arches and moss-veiled walls, remnants of a temple complex swallowed by time. Vines draped like funeral shrouds over cracked statues of moon-faced guardians, their stone eyes blind to the intruders. The air grew colder here, laced with the faint mineral scent of underground streams, and the ground sloped into a ravine where bioluminescent fungi clung to the rocks, casting an eerie blue glow that danced like will-o'-the-wisps. The wolf led her to a narrow crevice in the cliff face, barely wide enough for her frame, its entrance framed by roots that twisted like ancient wards. "Through here," she whispered, more to herself than the beast, squeezing into the darkness. The wolf followed, its bulk brushing against her back, a reassuring bulk in the suffocating press of stone. The passage twisted downward, the world above fading to echoes, the thunder of hooves now distant swallowed by the earth's embrace. Elara's hand trailed the rough wall, fingers tracing faint carvings. Wolves in mid-leap, moons entwined with thorns, symbols that mirrored the scar on her wrist. It pulsed again, warmer now, as if awakening to the temple's forgotten pulse. They emerged into a cavernous chamber, vast and echoing, where a subterranean lake lapped at obsidian shores. Shafts of moonlight filtered through cracks in the ceiling high above, painting the water in silver strokes and illuminating shelves of natural stone alcoves, lined with crystalline formations that hummed softly like the breath of sleeping spirits. The wolf shook itself, sending droplets scattering, and limped to the water's edge, lapping at the cool liquid with a thirst that mirrored Elara's own. She collapsed beside it, peeling back her torn cloak to assess the damage. Gashes across her ribs wept steadily, and her ankles swelled, purpled by the bite. But the wolf's earlier ministrations had staunched the worst. A strange tingling lingered where its tongue had touched, knitting flesh with unnatural speed. Kneeling, Elara cupped water in her palms, the chill biting into her skin. She washed the blood from her hands, watching it swirl away in crimson eddies. "What are you to me?" she murmured, her voice bouncing off the walls like a confession. The wolf lifted its head, water dripping from its muzzle, and met her gaze. In that silver depths, the vision surged anew, clearer this time, a grand hall of frost-rimed thrones, where a man with eyes like storm clouds pledged his heart to a woman whose touch bore the moon's mark, much like her own. But shadows crept in, courtiers with poisoned smiles, a ritual gone awry that bound him to the beast within, exiling him to these wilds, lest his rage consume the packs. The Alpha King, cursed to wander, seeking redemption or ruin. Elara recoiled, splashing water across her face, the cold a slap of reality. Her own mark, it wasn't just a childhood rite, a silly vow to the moon's spirits for protection. It was a key, a bloodline tie to the old ways, the priestesses who once tamed the wild magics. Her mother had whispered of such things before the fever silenced her. Tales of daughters chosen to mend what kings broke. Tears welled, hot against the cavern's chill, as grief twisted with revelation. All those years fleeing emptiness, and now this, a beast king who saw in her not prey, but salvation. The wolf whined, pressing its head to her knee, and she buried her fingers in its fur, feeling the steady thrum of its heart. Tenderness bloomed amid the ache, a fragile bridge over the chasm of her doubts. If you're him, the alpha, why hide? Why me? No answer came in words, only a low rumble, almost a purr, that vibrated through her bones. For a moment, the cavern felt less like a tomb and more like a sanctuary, the crystal's hum weaving a lullaby of ancient promises. But the respite shattered with a distant rumble, not thunder but the grind of stone. Dust sifted from the ceiling, and the wolf's ears snapped upright, hackles rising. Voices echoed from the passage above, muffled but insistent. The tracks lead here, fresh blood. The abomination can't have gone far. The riders, or their scouts, had found the crevice. Elara's pulse raced, fear coiling tight, but beneath it a spark ignited, the same fire from the fight, fueled now by the bond she'd glimpsed. The wolf tugged at her sleeve, urging her toward a far tunnel where the lake's waters plunged into shadow, perhaps an underwater escape or deeper catacombs. She nodded, wrapping her cloak tighter, the dagger heavy at her belt. As they moved, the crystals flared brighter, casting their path in ethereal light, and Elara felt the mark on her wrist ignite, threads of silver light snaking up her arm like veins of moonlight. Power stirred within her, unbidden and wild, a whisper of the priestess blood she hadn't known she carried. Shouts grew louder, boots scraping the tunnel walls, and the first flicker of torchlight pierced the gloom behind them. Elara glanced back, the wolf's form a white blur beside her, and in that instant she saw not just a beast, but a king, noble, broken, reaching for her hand in the vision's echo. Sacrifice loomed in the air, thick as the mist. To follow meant embracing the curse's heart, losing the simple life she'd clung to. But turning back, that would doom them both to hunters' blades. They dove into the tunnel, the water rising to their waists, cold as forgotten oaths. The current pulled them onward, the cavern's hum fading to a roar of pursuit and purpose. Elara's wounds screamed, but her resolve hardened, a quiet vow forming in the dark. Whatever this king hid, she'd unearth it, even if it tore her world apart. The bond tightened, pulling them into the depths where secrets waited, hungry and alive. The water surged around Elara's waist like a living serpent, cold and insistent, tugging her deeper into the tunnel's maw. She gasped as it rose to her chest, the chill seeping into her bones, numbing the fire of her wounds, but sharpening the ache in her heart. The white wolf swam beside her, its powerful strokes cutting through the current with effortless grace, though blood trailed from its flank in faint crimson ribbons that dissolved into the dark flow. Torchlight flickered erratically behind them, casting elongated shadows on the dripping walls, pursuers closing in, their shouts warped by the echo of stone and splash. Elara's lungs burned, her silver hair plastered to her face like a veil of moonlight drowned in shadow. The mark on her wrist glowed faintly, a beacon in the gloom, sending pulses of warmth that warred with the water's bite. It was as if the old magic stirred within her, whispering of bloodlines long severed. Priestesses who danced with the moon's wild children, binding curses with threads of light and sorrow. She had always dismissed her mother's tales as fevered dreams, but now, with the wolf's silver eyes locking onto hers through the spray, doubt crumbled like ancient ruins. They burst into a wider chamber, the current easing as the tunnel widened into a subterranean river fed by glowing fissures in the ceiling. Phosphorescent algae clung to the rocks, painting the space in hues of blue and silver, turning the water into a mirror of fractured stars. Elara hauled herself onto a jagged ledge, coughing up river water that tasted of minerals and forgotten oaths. The wolf shook itself beside her, sending droplets arcing like tiny comets, its breath coming in heavy pants that echoed her own exhaustion. For a moment, they rested in the dim luminescence, the pursuit's clamour muffled by the rush of the falls they'd left behind. She leaned against the wolf's side, its fur damp but warm, a living hearth against the cavern's chill. "We can't keep running like this," she whispered, her voice raw, fingers tracing the gashes on its hide. The beast whined softly, nuzzling her palm, and in that touch the visions flooded back, not fragments now, but a torrent. She saw him as he once was, Thorn, the Alpha King, his human form tall and unyielding, crowned with antlers of ice that gleamed under northern auroras. His court had been a realm of eternal frost, where packs swore fealty under blood moons, guardians of the veil between worlds. But envy festered in the shadows. His advisor, a sorcerer twisted by ambition, wove a curse during a ritual of union. Intended to bind Thorn's power to his bride, a priestess with the moon's mark, Elara's ancient kin, it backfired, twisting him into this half-form, beast by night, man by fragile dawn. The bride perished in the chaos, her death sealing the spell, dooming him to wander until one of her blood could choose, break the curse and free the Pax from his shadowed rule, or let it consume him, unleashing a rage that would ravage the realms. Elara pulled away, tears mingling with the water on her cheeks. The emptiness she'd fled, the fever that stole her family, leaving her a hollow shell, now felt like a prelude, a scar preparing her for this. "You're him," she breathed, the words heavy with awe and grief. "The king they hunt, and I'm part of this nightmare." The wolf's eyes held hers, sorrowful and fierce, a silent affirmation that pierced deeper than any claw. No words passed between them, only the raw pulse of shared destiny, a bond forged in blood and pursuit. The respite shattered as boots echoed from the tunnel above, the hunters' torches blooming like malignant flowers. "There! The glow! They've gone under!" a voice barked, rough with the Empire's clipped accent. These were no mere villagers, curse hunters, clad in black iron etched with wards against the wild magics, sworn to purge the old bloodlines that threatened the crumbling throne in Eldrath. Elara scrambled to her feet, the wolf rising with a growl that rumbled through the stone like thunder's prelude. But the ledge ended in a sheer drop to the river below, foaming white over jagged rocks, and a narrow archway led onward into deeper shadow, where the air hummed with an unnatural pull. The wolf bolted toward the archway, pausing to glance back, its form shimmering faintly in the algae's light, a hint of the man beneath, broad-shouldered and haunted. Elara followed, her wounded leg protesting with every hobble, the dagger clutched like a talisman. They squeezed through the arch, the walls pressing close, forcing her to brush against the wolf's side. Its presence was a comfort and a torment, stirring feelings she dared not name. A tenderness born of isolation, an impossible love woven from fur and fate. What if she could free him? What price would the moon exact? The passage opened into a vast antechamber, a forgotten heart of the temple where colossal statues loomed, wolves carved from obsidian, their eyes inlaid with moonstone that caught the filtered light from above. Vines snaked across the floor like veins, pulsing faintly, and in the center stood an altar of white marble, etched with runes that mirrored her wrist scar. The air thickened here, charged with latent power, the mist seeping in from cracks to swirl like spirits in mourning. Elara's mark flared brighter, silver light snaking up her arm, and she staggered, Visions assaulting her anew, Thorn's coronation, hands joined with the priestess under a canopy of stars, vows of eternal guardianship. Then the betrayal, the sorcerer's blade, dipped in shadow essence, severing the bond and birthing the beast. Kneeling at the altar, compelled by an inner tide, Elara placed her scarred hand on the stone. It warmed beneath her touch, runes igniting in a cascade of light that bathed the chamber in ethereal glow. The wolf approached, placing its paw beside hers, and for a heartbeat, the air trembled. His form flickered, fur receding to reveal glimpses of tanned skin, storm-grey eyes, a jaw set with regal sorrow. Elara, a voice echoed in her mind, not spoken but felt, deep as the earth's core. The choice is yours, but they come, and with them, the end. She gasped, the intimacy of his voice, a rumble like distant thunder, igniting a fire in her chest. Love impossible, sacrifice inevitable. The hunters burst through the archway then, 5 figures in shadowed cloaks, crossbows leveled, bolts tipped with silver that burned the air. "Abomination!" their leader snarled, a woman with eyes like chipped flint, her own wards glowing against the temple's magic. Bolts whistled, one grazing the wolf's ear, drawing a yelp that twisted Elara's heart. Fury rose in her, unbidden and wild. The runes on the altar surged, channeling through her mark, and she thrust her hand forward. Tendrils of moonlight lashed out, coiling around the nearest hunter like silver chains, slamming him against the wall with bone-cracking force. The wolf leaped into the fray, a blur of white fury, tackling another as claws rended armor and flesh. Elara dodged a bolt, her dagger flashing to parry a sword thrust, the power thrumming in her veins like a second heartbeat. She wasn't just surviving now, she was claiming her blood, the priestess awakening amid the violence. The leader lunged at her, blade arcing for her throat, but the wolf intercepted, jaws closing on the woman's arm with a crunch. She screamed, dropping her weapon, and Elara drove her dagger home, ending the cry in a gurgle. The remaining hunters faltered, wards flickering against the temple's rising hum, but one bolt found its mark, piercing the wolf's shoulder, silver poison spreading like frost fire. He staggered, form blurring back to beast, a pained howl escaping that shook the statues. Elara caught him as he slumped, cradling his massive head, tears falling freely. No, not yet. The chamber's light dimmed, the runes fading as the last hunter fled into the shadows, shouting for reinforcements. But victory tasted of ash. The poison coursed through him, his breath shallow, silver eyes dimming. In her arms he shifted again, fully to man now, Thorn's human form pale and scarred, his hand weak but reaching for hers. "The bond. It calls you home," he murmured, voice hoarse, lips brushing her knuckles. Pain and purpose warred in his gaze, a king's plea wrapped in vulnerability. She held him tighter, the emptiness within her filling with resolve, even as distant echoes of more pursuers swelled. The temple's secrets had awakened her, but the cost loomed. To save him, she might lose herself to the curse's depths. As the mist closed in, carrying whispers of ancient vows, Elara whispered back, "Then we'll face it together." The chamber fell silent, save for their shared breaths. The night outside raging on, pulling them toward a dawn stained with blood and rebirth. Thorn's weight pressed against Elara like a fallen star, heavy with the chill of silver poison threading through his veins. His human form was a revelation and a wound, broad chest rising in shallow gasps, skin etched with scars that mapped old battles, his storm-grey eyes clouded but fierce, locking onto hers with a desperation that stripped away the beast's veil. The temple chamber's glow had ebbed to a faint pulse, the obsidian wolves standing sentinel in the dimness, their moonstone eyes reflecting the silver light snaking from her wrist to his fading runes. Mist curled from the subterranean river like grieving spirits, carrying the coppery scent of spilled blood and the acrid bite of the hunter's wards. Elara's hands trembled as she cradled his head, her fingers brushing sweat-dampened hair from his brow. The dagger lay forgotten at her feet, slick with the leader's life. But violence felt distant now, overshadowed by this intimate unraveling. "Hold on," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the echoing vastness. The emptiness that had hollowed her since the fever now brimmed with a fierce protectiveness, a love blooming unbidden from the ruins of her solitude. Impossible, yes, king and wanderer, priestess blood and cursed flesh, but it anchored her, warmer than the cavern's chill. He coughed, a wet rasp that painted his lips with flecks of blood, and gripped her wrist where the mark burned like a brand. "The poison. It's the sorcerer's echo," he murmured, his voice rough as gravel under frost, laced with the rumble of his wolf self. "It binds tighter than chains, but your touch loosens it." His eyes searched hers, vulnerability cracking the regal mask. A king reduced to please, his destiny entwined with hers in ways that terrified and thrilled. Visions flickered at the edges of her mind, their ancient union, hands joined under blood moons, vows that promised eternity until betrayal shattered it all. She was the echo of that lost bride, her bloodline a key to redemption or ruin. Elara tore a strip from her cloak, pressing it to the bolt wound in his shoulder, where black veins, spider-webbed outward, pulsing with unnatural cold. The fabric soaked through instantly, but she channeled the temple's fading magic, her scarred palm glowing as she laid it over the injury. Warmth flowed from her, silver threads weaving into his skin, slowing the poison's creep. He arched with a groan, muscles tensing like coiled springs, and for a heartbeat his form blurred, fur rippling across his chest before receding, the curse warring with her light. "Elara," he breathed, the name a caress that sent shivers through her. "You've awakened what they fear. The packs sense it. They come drawn by blood and bond." The words hung heavy, stirring the air. Outside the chamber, the distant clamor swelled. More shouts, the thunder of boots and the whinny of horses filtering through the tunnels. The Empire's curse hunters weren't done. Reinforcements poured in, their wards clashing against the temple's ancient hum like discordant bells. Elara's heart clenched, the weight of sacrifice pressing down. To heal him fully, she'd have to dive deeper into the curse, risk her own soul to the wild magics her ancestors tamed. But turning away, that would leave him to fade, a king lost to shadows, and her to the hollow drift she'd fled. Thorn shifted, pulling her closer, his free hand tracing the curve of her jaw with a tenderness that belied his fading strength. "I was a fool once," he confessed, voice softening to a whisper that echoed only for her. "Pride blinded me to the court's rot, the sorcerer. He twisted our ritual, used my love as the blade. Now the packs fracture without me, rogue alphas rising, the veil thinning. If you break this, Elara, it could free us all, or unleash the beast in every heart." His gaze held hers, stormy depths swirling with regret and hope, a silent vow that pierced her core. In that moment, solitude shattered. She saw not just a cursed wanderer, but a man whose heart howled for redemption, mirroring her own buried longings. She leaned in, forehead to his, the mist wrapping them like a shroud. "Then we'll mend it," she said, resolve steeling her voice despite the tears tracing her cheeks. The mark on her wrist flared brighter, drawing power from the altar's runes. And she pressed her lips to the wound, a kiss of light and will. Energy surged, a tide of moonlight flooding his veins, pushing back the poison in shimmering waves. He gasped, body convulsing as the black threads retreated, his form stabilizing in human guise. But the effort drained her, dizziness swirling like the river's eddies, her vision spotting with stars. The chamber trembled then, dust sifting from the ceiling as the hunters breached the outer tunnels. Torchlight bloomed at the archway, casting long shadows that danced like wraiths. "There! In the heart chamber!" a voice barked, followed by the twang of crossbows. Bolts whistled through the air, one embedding in a statue with a crack like breaking bone. Thorn surged to his feet, pulling Elara behind the altar, his naked form clad only in the scars of his reign. Pain etched his features, but fury ignited his eyes, the wolf snarl curling his lips. "Stay low," he growled, snatching her dagger and lunging into the fray. He moved like a storm unleashed, half man, half beast, blurring at the edges as the curse flickered. A hunter charged, sword raised, but Thorn sidestepped, driving the blade into the man's gut with ruthless precision. Another fired a bolt that grazed his thigh, drawing a hiss, but he pressed on, tackling a third against the obsidian wolf statue. The impact shattered stone, moonstone eyes crumbling as the hunter's skull met unyielding rock. Elara rose, the power still humming in her blood, and summoned tendrils of mist-laced light. They lashed out, coiling around a crossbowman's legs, yanking him into the river with a splash and a scream. Violence and tenderness intertwined in the chaos. Thorn's strikes were brutal, yet he glanced back at her with protective fire, shielding her from a flung torch that singed the air. She fought beside him, dagger flashing to sever a ward chain that burned her skin, the pain a spark fueling her awakening. One hunter, a burly figure with a scarred face mirroring Thorn's own past wounds, lunged at her with a silver-tipped mace. She dodged, the weapon grazing her arm, but Thorn was there, claws extending from his fingers in a partial shift, raking across the man's chest. The hunter fell, gurgling, his wards fizzling out like dying embers. The last two fled, their retreat a cacophony of curses and clattering gear, but not before one hurled a vial of shadow essence, the sorcerer's remnant poison, that shattered at Thorn's feet. Black smoke billowed, searing his skin where it touched, forcing him to his knees with a roar that shook the vines. Elara dropped beside him, her hands on his face, channeling what magic remained. The smoke dissipated under her light, but exhaustion claimed them both, breaths mingling in the settling dust. As silence fell, broken only by the river's murmur, Thorn pulled her into his arms, human warmth enveloping her like a promise. "You've given me dawn," he whispered, lips brushing her temple, the bond thrumming between them, a love forged in blood, defying the curse's chains. Yet shadows lingered. The poison's echo pulsed faintly in his veins, and the hunter's retreat meant greater forces stirred above. Elara nestled against him, the temple's hum a lullaby of fragile peace, her heart aching with the beauty of this stolen moment. Destiny called, sacrifice loomed, but in his embrace hope flickered. A white flame against the encroaching night, pulling them toward whatever rebirth awaited in the wilds beyond. The chamber's hush wrapped around them like a fragile truce, the subterranean river's murmur, the only witness to their shared breath. Thorn's arms encircled Elara, his human warmth a stark contrast to the curse's lingering chill, but even in this stolen sanctuary, shadows stirred at the edges of her vision. The obsidian statues loomed taller now, their cracked moonstone eyes seeming to watch with silent judgment, vines pulsing faintly along the floor like veins quickening with dread. Mist seeped from the fissures above, carrying the faint, acrid whisper of the shadow essence that had nearly claimed him. And Elara's wounds throbbed in rhythm with her pounding heart, a reminder that peace was but a breath between storms. She pulled back slightly, tracing the fresh scars blooming across his chest where the poison had clawed its mark, her fingers lingering on the raised lines that told tales of battles older than her grief. "This isn't over," she said softly, her voice echoing off the stone like a vow etched in frost. Thorn's grey eyes, storm-tossed and weary, met hers, the king's resolve flickering beneath the vulnerability. "No," he admitted, his hand covering hers, calluses rough from claws that weren't fully tamed. The sorcerer's web spans farther than this temple. The pacts, they fracture without a true alpha, and the Empire scents weakness. But you've given me strength, Elara. More than light, you've given me reason. The words hung between them, heavy with the impossible love that had bloomed in the wild's embrace. She had followed a cry into the unknown, trading solitude for this tangled destiny, and now tenderness warred with the terror of loss. Her family's fevered ghosts whispered in her mind, empty hearths, hollow eyes. But here in his gaze she found echoes of purpose, a bridge over the chasm of her emptiness. Yet doubt gnawed. Her priestess blood awakened too late, too raw, and the mark on her wrist burned as if the moon itself demanded tribute. A low rumble shook the chamber then, not from the river, but from the earth above. Hooves, thundering like war drums, mingled with the snarls of beasts unbound. Thorn tensed, his form shimmering at the edges, fur threatening to reclaim him as the curse sensed peril. "They've summoned the rogues," he growled, rising with a grace that belied his wounds, pulling her to her feet. The air thickened, charged with the wild magic stirring in the temple's heart, and Elara felt it too, a pull in her veins, her power coiling like mist ready to lash. They moved as one toward a concealed stairwell behind the altar, carved steps spiraling upward through roots and stone, emerging into the ruined forest under a sky bruised with storm clouds. Rain began to fall in heavy sheets, turning the earth to mud that sucked at their boots, the ancient pines bowing under the onslaught like mourners at a grave. Torchlight pierced the gloom ahead, a line of Empire riders flanked by hulking shadow wolves, rogue beasts twisted by the curse's fringes, their eyes glowing with fractured hunger, led by a massive brute whose scars spoke of pack wars lost. Elara's breath caught as the riders halted. Their leader, a gaunt man in black iron, face hooded and etched with ritual burns, raised a hand. "The abomination and its witch," he intoned, voice carrying over the rain like a blade. "The Emperor's decree, purge the old blood, seal the veil forever." Crossbows clicked, silver-tipped bolts glinting, but Thorn stepped forward naked and unyielding, his presence a thunderclap that made the rogues whine and shift uneasily. Partial shift rippled through him, claws extending, eyes silvering, yet he held the man-form, drawing on the bond with Elara to anchor him. The battle erupted in a frenzy of rain and fury. Thorn charged the lead rogue, a colossal clash of muscle and malice, his roar blending with the storm as claws tore through matted fur. Blood sprayed, mingling with the downpour, turning the clearing to a slick mire. Elara dodged a rider's lance, her dagger flashing to sever reins, sending a horse rearing into the shadows. Power surged from her mark, tendrils of moonlight weaving through the rain like silver veins, coiling around a shadow wolf's throat and crushing its growl to a whimper. Violence tore at her, a bolt grazed her shoulder, fire blooming, but tenderness fueled her strikes, each one for the king who fought not just to survive, but to reclaim a shattered world. Thorn battled the brute, their forms a blur of white and black against the lightning-streaked sky. The rogue pinned him briefly, fangs sinking into his arm, but Elara's light lashed out, blinding the beast and giving Thorn the moment to twist free, driving his claws into its heart. It fell with a final guttural howl, body dissolving into wisps of shadow, the curse's echo fading into the mud. Yet victory came at cost. The leader's sorcerous blade found Thorn's side, a shallow gash that wept dark blood, the poison's remnant flaring anew. Riders fell or fled into the tempest, their wards shattered by the temple's unleashed hum, but the gaunt leader lingered, hurling a final curse, a vial of essence that exploded at Elara's feet. Black tendrils snaked up her legs, cold as void, seeping into her skin and stirring the wild magic within. She cried out, collapsing as visions assaulted her, the ancient ritual's failure, the bride's death in Thorn's arms, and now her own choice. Sacrifice the bond to save him, or let it consume them both, birthing a new reign from ruin. Thorn dropped beside her, shielding her from the rain, his hands pulling the darkness from her veins with desperate pulls of light. "No!" he snarled, voice breaking. "Not you!" The effort drained him, his form blurring fully to wolf once more, the curse reclaiming what her power had briefly tamed. Elara clung to his fur, tears lost in the downpour, the emptiness within her twisting into resolve. Pain carved deep, a loss of innocence, but it revealed her true self. The priestess, the key, willing to bleed for this love's fragile hope. As the storm raged on, the last rider vanished into the trees, the forest swallowing their retreat. Thorn's whine pierced the thunder, nuzzling her, and Elara rose, leaning on him, the bond a tether stronger than chains. Deeper into the wilds they pressed, toward the northern peaks where the packs gathered, the moon breaking through clouds like a promise of rebirth. Destiny's weight settled, sacrifice's shadow long, but in the wolf's silver gaze she saw not end, but the dawn of what they might yet become. Two souls forged in melancholy's fire, chasing redemption through the encroaching night. The rain-slicked peaks rose like jagged teeth against the storm's fury. The northern wilds a labyrinth of ice-veined cliffs and wind-scoured pines that whispered of ancient pacts long broken. Elara leaned into the white wolf's side, her fingers buried in his sodden fur, each step a symphony of shared agony, her shoulder wound seeping warmth down her arm, his limp a echo of the blade's cruel kiss. The downpour masked their passage, turning the trail to a river of mud that pulled at their resolve, but the bond thrummed between them, a silver pulse guiding them onward like a heartbeat in the dark. Thunder rolled overhead, lightning fracturing the sky to reveal glimpses of auroras dancing on the horizon, blood moons bleeding into dawn, omens of the pack's gathering. Thorn's form flickered in the tempest, Wolf's grace warring with the man's shadow, the curse's poison a black vein threading his flank. He whined low, nuzzling her hand, silver eyes reflecting the storm's wild light. Elara's heart clenched, the impossible love that had rooted in her solitude now ablaze against the cold. She had lost her old life to this cry, the village's hollow safety, the ghosts of fevered kin. But in losing it, she had found her fire, the priestess blood singing in her veins like a forgotten song. "We're close," she murmured, rain tracing paths down her face like tears she no longer shed alone. The emptiness that had defined her twisted into purpose, sharp as the thorns snagging her cloak. The trail crested a ridge, opening to a vast hollow cradled by sheer rock faces, where mist clung like a shroud over a frozen lake. Howls rose from the shadows, dozens of voices, raw and fractured, circling the water's edge under the aurora's eerie glow. The packs had come, drawn by the bond's call. Sleek greys from the eastern vales, scarred hulks from the border wastes, their eyes a mosaic of loyalty and feral doubt. At the center stood a natural throne of ice and bone, remnants of some pre-curse rite where the rogue alphas prowled, massive beasts with fur matted by endless skirmishes, challenging any who dared claim the alpha's mantle. Thorn halted at the hollow's lip, his body tensing, Ibur rippling as the curse surged with the pack's proximity. Elara felt it too, a tidal pull in her mark, the moon's power swelling like a storm within. The pack stilled, noses lifting to scent the air, then a chorus of snarls erupted, directed not at intruders, but at the white wanderer who had returned broken. One rogue, a brute with eyes like chipped obsidian, lunged forward, testing the king with bared fangs, and a challenge howl that shook the ice. Thorn met it head-on, bursting into the hollow in a blur of white fury. The clash was primal, bodies slamming against the frozen lake with cracks like shattering glass, claws rending fur in sprays of blood that steamed in the rain. Elara scrambled down after him, her dagger drawn, the silver light from her wrist coiling like a living shield. Rogues flanked her, drawn by the scent of old magic, but she unleashed tendrils of moonlight, lashing them back with whips that seared their hides and evoked whimpers of ancient fear. Pain lanced her side as one grazed her thigh, but she pressed on, her strikes fueled by the tenderness that bound her to Thorn, a love that demanded she fight not just for survival, but for the redemption flickering in his every roar. The packs encircled the fray, torn between fealty and the curse's fracture, howls mingling with the storm in a cacophony of destiny's weight. Thorn pinned the obsidian-eyed brute, jaws at its throat, but hesitated, mercy or weakness, and it twisted free, raking claws across his chest. Blood welled, the poison flaring black, and he staggered, form blurring to man mid-fall, naked and vulnerable on the ice. The rogues closed in, a tide of fangs and hunger, but Elara reached him, dropping to her knees, her hands on his wounds. "Not like this!" she gasped, the mark igniting in a blaze that lit the hollow like a false dawn. Power surged from her, unbidden and vast, drawing from the aurora's veil-thinning light. Silver threads poured into Thorn, knitting flesh and curse alike, but the cost clawed at her. Visions of the ancient bride's sacrifice flooding her mind, the ritual's heart demanding a toll. To break the chains, she had to sever a piece of herself, the fragile humanity she'd clung to, the solitude that had shielded her heart. Doubt warred with resolve, tears freezing on her lashes, but his grey eyes met hers, stormy and pleading, a silent vow that echoed their bond. "Together," he rasped, hand gripping hers, the king's strength lending her the final push. She pressed her scarred wrist to his chest, over the beating heart where the curse rooted deepest. Light exploded outward, a cascade of moonlight that swept the hollow, blinding the rogues and shattering the ice throne into crystalline shards. The packs yelped, recoiling as the magic rippled through them, purging the sorcerer's shadows in waves of purifying fire. Thorn arched, a howl tearing from his throat, man and beast merging in agony, while Elara felt the severing. A rip in her soul, the emptiness returning not as void, but as a scar, a hollow space where her old fears had lived, now filled with the wild's echo. The light faded, leaving the hollow hushed under the storm's easing rumble. Thorn rose, fully man now, scars silvered by the moon's kiss, his form unyielding and whole. The packs approached warily, then bowed, heads low in renewed fealty, the Alpha's throne reformed not of ice, but of their unified howls. He turned to Elara, pulling her into an embrace that chased the rain's chill, his lips finding hers in a kiss tasting of blood and rebirth, tender, fierce, a promise forged in sacrifice's forge. Yet the scar lingered in her chest, a quiet ache reminding her of what was lost, the simple wanderer, free of crowns and curses. She traced it with a hand, meeting his gaze with a soft smile, the dawn breaking through clouds in hues of rose and gold. No words passed, only a shared look heavy with melancholy's beauty, his fingers intertwining with hers in a final gesture of unbreakable bond. The packs gathered close, a living shield against the Empire's distant threats, and together they turned toward the peak's heart, where new realms awaited, hope rising from the wild's depths, a white flame enduring through the encroaching light.